The Used Gun Shop Veteran. Full script. The bell above the door hadn't rung in 3 hours. Marcus wiped down the glass counter for the 4th time that morning, his weathered hands moving in practiced circles over the display case filled with revolvers and semi-automatics. 42 years he'd been doing this. 42 years of watching people walk through that door with stories etched into their faces, carrying firearms that held secrets he'd never fully know. Some came to sell Grandpa's old Winchester, tears still fresh on their cheeks. Others arrived with guns they'd rather forget they ever owned, their eyes darting to the street as if someone might be following. The pawn shop down the street had closed last month. The sporting goods store 2 blocks over went under before that. But Marcus's used gun shop remained, a relic from another era, standing defiant on a street corner that had seen better decades. The neighborhood had changed around him like seasons passing in time-lapse, but this place stayed the same. Sawdust on the concrete floor, the smell of gun oil and old leather, fluorescent lights humming their eternal song overhead. Behind him, the wall of used firearms told 1,000 stories he'd never hear. Each scratch, each worn grip, each missing bluing spoke of lives he'd never know. Today would be different, though. Marcus didn't know it yet, but the next customer to walk through that door would bring more than just another gun to sell. They'd bring a mystery that would consume his final days in the shop and force him to confront truths about the business he thought he knew everything about. Marcus had opened the shop at 7 sharp, same as he had every morning since 1983. The routine never changed. Unlock the 3 deadbolts, disarm the alarm system, flip the sign from closed to open, and brew the first pot of coffee. The machine gurgled and hissed in the back room while he prepared for the day, its familiar sounds as comforting as a heartbeat. He'd bought that coffee maker in 1991, and it still worked perfectly, not like the disposable garbage they made these days. The morning light filtered through the barred windows, casting long shadows across the display cases. Marcus moved through his domain with the confidence of a man who knew every square inch of his territory. He could navigate this shop blindfolded, could tell you exactly where every firearm sat, could recall the story behind most of them. That Colt Python in Case 3, 3rd row, came from a retired detective who'd carried it for 28 years, never fired it once outside the range. The Remington 870 leaning against the back wall, estate sale from a farmer's widow. Her husband had used it to keep coyotes away from the chickens for 40 years. The computer on the counter blinked at him, its screen covered in sticky notes with passwords and reminders. Marcus had resisted getting a computer for years, but the ATF regulations eventually forced his hand. Federal firearms license required detailed records, background checks, transaction logs. The paperwork had tripled since he first opened, though the foot traffic had been cut in half, maybe worse than half. He pulled out his ledger, the old-fashioned kind with actual paper pages, and reviewed yesterday's transactions. One sale. A young woman buying her first pistol for home defense, nervous but determined. He'd spend an hour with her, teaching her basic safety, recommending a training course, making sure she understood the responsibility she was taking on. That was the part of the job most people didn't understand. Marcus wasn't just selling tools. He was a guardian of sorts, a gatekeeper who could refuse a sale if something felt wrong. Over the decades, he'd developed an instinct for it, could read people the way others read books. The twitchy ones got turned away. The angry ones got shown the door. Anyone who seemed like they were buying a gun to settle a score or prove something, they could take their business elsewhere. The bell above the door chimed. Marcus looked up from his ledger, squinting through his reading glasses at the figure entering the shop. Man in his 30s, clean-cut, wearing a sport coat despite the summer heat. He carried a leather case about the right size for a handgun. A seller then, not a buyer. They had a different energy about them. "Morning," Marcus called out, setting down his pen. "What can I do for you?" The man approached the counter with measured steps, placing the leather case down gently. I was told you're the guy to see about unusual firearms, the expert. Marcus had heard variations of that line 1,000 times. Everyone thought their gun was special, unusual, worth more than it really was. Been doing this a while, he said simply. What have you got? The man unzipped the case slowly, almost ceremonially. Inside, nestled in foam padding, lay a Colt single-action revolver. The finish was worn, the grip
showed decades of handling, but even from across the counter, Marcus could tell this wasn't just another old gun. Something about it whispered of significance. "May I?" Marcus asked, reaching for the revolver after the man nodded. The weight felt right in his hand. The balance was perfect. Marcus pulled back the hammer, checked the cylinder, examined the markings. Serial number placed it as manufactured in the early 1900s. But it was the modifications that caught his attention. Custom sights, carefully fitted. The action had been smoothed by someone who knew what they were doing. A professional gunsmith with real skill. The grip had been reshaped to fit a specific hand. "Where'd you get this?" Marcus asked, unable to hide his interest. "My grandfather passed last month. Found it in his safe. He never talked about it, never showed it to anyone as far as I know." The man paused, studying Marcus's face. "The thing is, I found something else with it. Letters. And they mention your shop. Mention you by name, actually." Marcus set the revolver down carefully. In 4 decades, he'd handled thousands of firearms. He prided himself on remembering the important ones, the ones with real history. But this Colt didn't trigger any memories. "I don't recall ever seeing this piece. You sure about those letters?" The man pulled a folded envelope from his jacket pocket. The paper was yellowed with age, the handwriting on the outside shaky but legible. Marcus recognized the address immediately. His shop, but from 30 years ago, back when this was still a decent neighborhood where you could walk the streets after dark without worrying. "There are 5 letters total, all addressed to your shop. Never sent, apparently. My grandfather kept them with the gun." Marcus unfolded the first letter, his hands steadier than they had any right to be at 70 years old. The date at the top read March 15, 1993. The year his daughter graduated high school. The year his first marriage ended. A year he remembered as one of transition and difficulty. "Dear Marcus, you won't remember me, though I've been in your shop exactly 3 times. Each time you helped me, treated me with respect when others in your line of work wouldn't. You didn't ask questions you didn't need answers to. That kind of discretion is rare. There's something I need you to understand about this Colt, something about its history that might matter someday. I'm writing this because I won't be around forever, and someone should know the truth." The letter went on, but Marcus stopped reading. His hands had started shaking, just slightly, not from age or weakness, but from recognition. Memories were surfacing, ones he'd buried under decades of daily routine and deliberate forgetting. "You okay?" the man asked, concern creasing his forehead. Marcus nodded, though his mind was racing backward through the years. 1993, March. 3 customers who needed discretion. The details were foggy, hidden behind a curtain of time, but fragments were breaking through. A woman with bruises she tried to hide. A man who paid in cash and left through the back door. Another man, older, distinguished, who'd seemed desperate despite his expensive clothes. "These letters," Marcus said carefully. "Did you read them?" "Just the first one. Felt wrong to read more without talking to you first. Grandfather's handwriting mentioned things that seemed sensitive." The bell above the door chimed again. A regular customer, old Tom Henderson, coming for his weekly browse.
Marcus waved at him, and Tom settled into his usual routine, examining the used hunting rifles along the wall. He'd never bought anything in 10 years of weekly visits, but Marcus didn't mind. Some people just needed a place to be. Marcus looked back at the young man. "I'm going to need some time with these letters, and I'd like to research this cult, see what I can find in my old records. Can you leave it with me for a few days?" The man hesitated. Marcus understood. Trust didn't come easy, especially when family heirlooms were involved. But something in the young man's eyes suggested he'd come here seeking more than just an appraisal. He'd come looking for answers about his grandfather, about a part of the man's life that had remained hidden until death revealed its edges. 3 days, the man finally agreed. "I'll come back Friday afternoon. And Marcus, my grandfather's name was Thomas Reeves, in case that matters." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Thomas Reeves. The distinguished man in the expensive clothes. The one who'd come to the shop in March of 1993, desperate and afraid, carrying that Colt and a story Marcus had promised to forget. A promise he'd kept for 30 years. Until now. After the young man left, Marcus locked the door and flipped the sign to closed, ignoring Tom Henderson's confused look. He gathered the letters and the Colt and headed to the back room.
Boxes of old records sat stacked in corners, gathering dust. Somewhere in those boxes was a file he'd told himself he'd destroyed years ago, but Marcus had never been good at destroying history. He was a keeper of stories, a collector of truths too heavy for others to carry. The file was in the third box he opened, buried under a decade of tax forms and background check paperwork. The tab was labeled simply TR, March 93. Inside were copies of forms, notes in his own handwriting, and a photograph he didn't remember taking. Thomas Reeves stared out from the faded Polaroid, his face grave, his eyes holding secrets Marcus had promised never to reveal. Marcus sat down at his cluttered desk and spread the materials before him. The letters from young Reeves, the file from old Reeves, and in the middle, the Colt Single Action Army, a silent witness to events that had shaped lives and destroyed others. He opened the second letter, dated 6 months after the first. What he read there made him reach for the phone with shaking hands, dialing a number he'd hoped never to use again, wondering if anyone would even answer after 3 decades. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, a woman's voice answered, hoarse with age, but still carrying the same edge it had in 1993. "I wondered when you'd call," she said, without Marcus saying a word. "He's gone, then. Tom's finally gone." The woman's name was Sarah Chen, and she'd been a detective with Metro PD back when Marcus first met her. That was ancient history now, back when the department actually responded to calls in this neighborhood, before budget cuts and shifting priorities made these streets someone else's problem. Sarah had been the kind of cop who actually gave a damn, who remembered that the badge meant something beyond a paycheck and pension. "Can you come to the shop?" Marcus asked, his voice lower than he'd intended. Old Tom Henderson was still out front, probably wondering why the owner had suddenly closed up in the middle of the day. "I've got something you need to see." Sarah didn't ask questions over the phone. She never did. "Give me an hour. Don't open that door for anyone else." The line went dead. Marcus set the phone down and studied the photograph again. Thomas Reeves at maybe 50 years old, distinguished in the way men with money and education carried themselves. But his eyes told a different story. Fear lived in those eyes, the kind that came from knowing too much or seeing something you couldn't unsee. Marcus remembered that look now, how it had made him uneasy, even as he'd processed the paperwork. He opened the 3rd letter while he waited. The date said September 1993, 6 months after the first, 3 months after the second. Marcus. The situation has evolved in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The Colt has become more than a family heirloom. It's evidence now, though evidence of what, I'm still not entirely certain. Sarah thinks we should bring it to the department, make it official. I disagree. The moment this becomes official, people die. Maybe me, probably her, definitely others who don't deserve what's coming. I need you to understand something about that night in March, about what I saw and why I brought the Colt to you. Marcus had to stop reading. His coffee had gone cold in the cup, but he drank it anyway, needing something to do with his hands. March 1993. That night. Details were solidifying now, breaking through the surface of 3 decades of intentional forgetting. Thomas Reeves had come to the shop just before closing, around 7 in the evening. Marcus remembered because he'd been about to lock up, already thinking about the bar down the street where he'd drown another evening in whiskey and regret. His marriage was imploding, his daughter barely speaking to him, and the shop wasn't making enough money to justify the stress. He'd been in a dark place that spring. Reeves had entered carrying the leather case, walking with the careful steps of a man trying not to draw attention. He'd worn an expensive suit that marked him as out of place in this neighborhood, but his eyes had that hunted look that transcended social class. Rich, poor, or anywhere in between, fear made everyone the same. "I need to sell this," Reeves said without preamble, setting the case on the counter. No questions, no paperwork that could be traced back to. Cash transaction. Marcus had dealt with plenty of people wanting to skirt the law. He usually turned them away. Federal firearms license meant following federal rules, and those rules existed for good reasons. But something about Reeves made him pause. The man wasn't trying to hide stolen property or conceal a crime. He was trying to survive something. "Can't do no paperwork," Marcus said. "ATF would have my license. But I can hold it for you. Storage like. No money changes hands, no transfer of ownership, just keeping it safe." Reeves considered
this, visibly weighing options in his mind. Finally, he nodded. "How long would you keep it?" "Long as needed." That's when Reeves had opened the case and shown him the Colt. Marcus had recognized its quality immediately, seen the custom work, understood that this wasn't some flea market find. This was a gun with history, with meaning. "There's another reason I came to you," Reeves had said quietly. "Sarah Chen, Detective Chen. She recommended you, said you were trustworthy, discreet." The mention of Sarah had changed everything. Marcus knew Sarah from the robbery investigation in 1991, when someone had tried to break into his shop and ended up shooting themselves with their own gun in the confusion. Sarah had handled the case, had spent hours in the shop taking statements and gathering evidence. They developed a mutual respect, the kind that came from recognizing competence in another person. "If Sarah sent you, that's good enough," Marcus had said. "Tell me what you need." What Reeves had needed was simple but strange. Store the Colt indefinitely. Don't ask questions. If anyone came looking for it, specifically anyone official, call a number Reeves provided before saying anything. And, most importantly, if something happened to Reeves, if he disappeared or died under unusual circumstances, get the gun to Sarah Chen personally. No intermediaries. Marcus had agreed. He'd filled out an inventory card, filed it under a generic description, and locked the Colt in his personal safe, separate from the shop's regular inventory. Reeves had left through the back door, checking the alley before stepping out into the evening. Marcus hadn't seen him again for 3 months. A knock on the shop's front door brought Marcus back to the present. Through the glass he could see Sarah Chen, older now but still carrying herself with that cop authority that never quite faded. He unlocked the door and let her in, relocking it immediately behind her. "You look like hell," Sarah said by way of greeting. "And again, so do I. Getting old is not for cowards." She'd aged well despite the wear. White hair cropped short, sharp eyes that still missed nothing, a slight limp from a knee that had given out 5 years into retirement. She'd left the force in 2005, burned out and disillusioned by departmental politics and a series of cases that went nowhere despite solid evidence. "His grandson came in this morning," Marcus said, leading him to the back room. "Brought the Colt and some letters Thomas wrote. Never mailed them. Kept them with the gun." Sarah stopped walking. Letters about that night? Haven't read 'em all yet, but yeah, seems like Thomas wanted someone to know the truth eventually. The back room smelled of gun oil and old paper, a combination that had become Marcus's signature scent over the decades. He'd spent countless hours back here, surrounded by the accumulated debris of a life spent trading in other people's stories. Sarah looked around, her cop eyes cataloging details, probably making assessments about his organizational skills or lack of there. Marcus spread the materials across his desk: the Colt, the letters, his old file, the photograph. Sarah picked up the photo first, studied it with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe? Or regret? Or both, mixed with something darker. "He was a good man," Sarah said quietly. "Better than most. Better than me, certainly." "What happened that night?" Marcus asked. "I never wanted to know before. You both made it clear that ignorance was safety. But Thomas's grandson deserves answers. Hell, maybe I deserve some too." Sarah set down the photograph and picked up the Colt, checking the cylinder with practiced ease. "You remember the West Side murders?" Marcus felt his stomach drop. Everyone in the city remembered the West Side murders. Spring and summer of 1993, 5 people shot dead over the course of 4 months, all in upscale neighborhoods on the city's west side, all with the same MO. Single shot to the head, close range, executed with professional precision. No robbery, no sexual assault, no apparent motive. The murders had terrified the wealthy parts of town, made people install security systems and hire private guards. Then they'd just stopped. Case went cold. Still officially unsolved. "Thomas witnessed one," Sarah said simply. "March 12, 1993. He was walking his dog late at night, heard the shot, saw the shooter leaving the scene. Got a perfect look at his face." "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed. "Did he report it?" "To me. Directly to me. Because the face he saw belonged to a cop. Detective Robert Mallory, my partner at the time." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus reached for his cold coffee, remembered it was empty, set the cup back down. His mind was trying to process implications, connect dots across 30 years of accumulated history. "The Colt," Marcus said. "Where did Thomas get it?" Sarah's face hardened.
That's where it gets complicated. Thomas was a history professor, specialized in the Old West. He'd collected antique firearms for years, had a nice collection that was mostly display pieces. But the Colt was special. It had belonged to a lawman from the 1880s, a marshal named James Garrett, who'd been famous for his integrity, for standing up to corruption in Tombstone. Thomas had bought it at auction, paid a fortune for it because of the provenance. He wanted a piece of incorruptible law, Marcus said, understanding. Something pure. "He wanted protection from a corrupt cop," Sarah corrected. "After he came to me, after he told me what he'd seen, I believed him. Mallory had always been slick, always seemed to have money he shouldn't have on a detective's salary. But I had no proof, no way to investigate without tipping him off. So Thomas and I made a plan. He'd get a gun for protection, something with stopping power. I suggested he buy something new, modern. He showed up with the Colt instead." Marcus picked up the 4th letter, dated November 1993. His hands weren't shaking anymore. They'd moved past shock into something colder, harder. The feeling he got when a deal went bad, when he had to throw someone out of his shop, when the world revealed its uglier corners. Marcus. Sarah was wrong about one thing. She thought keeping the Colt would keep me safe. But safety is an illusion when you've seen what I've seen. Mallory knows I witnessed something that night. He doesn't know exactly what I saw or how much I could prove, but he knows enough to be dangerous. The other murders have stopped, which means he's either finished or lying low. Either way, I'm a loose end. The Colt represents more than just protection now. It's become a symbol of what law enforcement should be, but often isn't. If anything happens to me, if this situation resolves in the worst possible way, I want you and Sarah to understand that the gun isn't evidence of a crime. It's evidence of an ideal we failed to live up to." The letter continued, but Marcus had to stop reading again. The weight of Thomas Reeves's words, his idealism tinged with cynicism, his understanding that good intentions didn't stop bullets. Sarah was reading over his shoulder, her breath catching at certain passages. He died in 1995. Car accident. Single vehicle, late at night, lost control on a curve he'd driven 1,000 times. Reports said mechanical failure, brake lines corroded. I investigated privately, found evidence they'd been tampered with, but I couldn't prove it, couldn't tie it to Mallory. And by then, Mallory had transferred to another department, moved up to chain. He's deputy chief now, still climbing. Marcus set down the letter and looked at Sarah. "Why didn't you do something? You had Thomas's testimony. You could have gone to Internal Affairs, the FBI, someone." "With what evidence?" Sarah's voice carried 30 decades of frustration. "A witness who saw a face for 3 seconds in the dark? A detective with no obvious connection to the victims? No murder weapon, no forensic evidence, no motive we could prove? Thomas's testimony would have gotten him killed faster, and Mallory would have walked. I made a choice to keep Thomas alive as long as possible. I failed at that, too." The shop's front door rattled. Someone testing the lock, finding it secured. Marcus ignored it. If they wanted something badly enough, they'd come back during actual business hours. The 5th letter. What's in the 5th letter? Sarah picked it up, her hand steadier than Marcus felt. The date on this one was January 1995, just 2 months before Thomas Reeves died in that not-accidental accident. Marcus and Sarah. If you're reading this, I'm dead. Probably not from natural causes. I've made my peace with that. But I need you both to understand what this cult represents, why I insisted on keeping it, why I've written these letters instead of just letting the truth die with me. The gun belonged to Marshall James Garrett. In 1882, Garrett faced a choice. The mayor of Tombstone wanted him to look the other way on certain criminal activities, offered him money and protection to be a cop who could be bought. He refused. He quit being a marshal rather than compromise. 6 months later, someone shot him in the back. His murder was never solved. I think about Garrett a lot. He had the courage to walk away. I don't. I can't leave my family, can't abandon my life because I witnessed something I shouldn't have. But I can make sure the truth survives. Inside the cult's grip, hidden in a compartment I had custom made, there's a micro-cassette tape. On that tape is a confession. Not from Mallory, he'd never be that stupid, but from someone connected to him, someone who explained exactly why the West Side murders happened and who ordered them. The person on that tape died of an overdose 3 weeks after I recorded it.
Ruled accidental. I doubt it was. Keep the gun safe. Keep the truth safe. And if the time ever comes when you can use it, when you can make things right, then Marshall Garrett's integrity will have served one final purpose. Marcus and Sarah stared at the Colt lying on the desk. Marcus picked it up, studied the grip more carefully. There, nearly invisible unless you knew what to look for, was a seam in the wood. Custom work, expertly concealed. He pulled out his smallest screwdriver, worked it into the seam with steady hands. The compartment opened. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, was a micro-cassette tape, the kind that hadn't been commonly used since the mid-90s. Marcus pulled it out carefully, held it up to the light. "I don't even know if I have a player that can play this anymore," he said. "I do," Sarah replied. "At home. Old evidence recorder I kept when I retired. Probably still works." The front door rattled again, harder this time, persistent. Marcus glanced through the doorway to the shop's main area, saw a figure peering through the glass. Not old Tom Henderson, someone else, someone watching too intently. "We need to leave," Sarah said, her cop instincts flaring.
Out the back, now! Marcus grabbed the Colt, the tape, and the letters. Sarah was already moving toward the back door, her hand reaching instinctively for a gun that wasn't there anymore, hadn't been there since retirement. They exited into the alley, the same alley Thomas Reeves had left through 30 years ago, running from the same shadows. Behind them, the sound of breaking glass echoed through the shop. Someone wasn't willing to wait for business hours. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for, and after 30 years of patience, they'd finally run out of time to be subtle. Sarah's car was parked 2 blocks away, a practical sedan that blended into traffic like water into water. They moved quickly, but not frantically, 2 old people who still remembered how to not draw attention. Marcus carried the leather case with the Colt and its secrets, and every step felt heavier than the last. Behind them, somewhere in the maze of streets and alleys, someone was searching his shop, someone who'd waited 30 years for this moment. "Your place or mine?" Marcus asked as they reached the sedan. "Neither. Somewhere public, crowded. Harder to make a move.